questions 1 to 6 together. I travelled to the United States last month for the annual St. Patrick's Day visit to Washington, D.C., following which I also visited Chicago. In Washington, D.C., I had a series of political discussions and meetings, including with President Trump, Vice President Pence, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Patrick Leahy, and Congressman Richie Neal and Peter King. In each meeting, we discussed the Ireland-US bilateral relationship, including the importance of the two-way economic relationship between us, as well as between the US and the European Union. I explained the government's position on Brexit and the importance of ensuring that there is no return to a hard border on the island of Ireland. As ever, there was clear and unambiguous backing, both within the administration and across Congress, for the Northern Ireland peace process and the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement. I highlighted the continuing problems facing the undocumented in the US and called for a speedy resolution of this issue, while acknowledging that it affects people from countries other than Ireland as well. I also expressed the government's appreciation for the strong backing, both from the administration and across the aisles in Congress, for the E3 bill last year, which we hope will be reintroduced shortly. I didn't have an opportunity for a detailed discussion on climate change issues during the visit. My programme in Washington, D.C. also included a number of engagements with an economic focus, including events hosted by the US Chamber of Commerce, Enterprise Ireland and Science Foundation Ireland, and Tourism Ireland as well. At these events, I met some Irish-owned companies, which in total employ more than 100,000 workers in the US. And I also met US companies with significant investments in Ireland. I attended some other St. Patrick's Day events, including the White House reception, a breakfast hosted by Vice President Pence, and receptions hosted by the Irish Ambassador, and also a dinner hosted by the Ireland Funds. In Chicago, I had a meeting with some immigrant support groups that receive Irish government funding, and had the opportunity to reaffirm the government's commitment to finding a resolution to the status of the undocumented. I also met with some political leaders, including Governor of Illinois, Jay Pritzker, the Mayor of Chicago, or the then Mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, where we discussed bilateral relations and topical issues, including Brexit. I also met incoming Mayor Lightfoot. I attended Chicago's annual St. Patrick's Day events, including a dinner hosted by the Irish Fellowship Church, read at Mass in the Old Street St. Patrick's Church, and attended the Chicago Parade. Finally, I launched Tourism Ireland's new publication, marking the 10th anniversary of the Global Greening Initiative on the Chicago River. This visit was an invaluable opportunity to promote Ireland's interests with the US system and with political and business community leaders, as well as to deepen the political, economic and cultural links between Ireland and the United States.
Reply. As you know, Taoiseach, the decision of President Trump to unilaterally withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement has been immensely damaging to the climate change agenda worldwide. And allied to this, the obsessive attempt by President Trump's administration to promote fossil fuels above cleaner and sustainable alternatives means that the United States, at least at federal level, is not just opting out of the agreement, it is actively trying to prevent it from achieving its goals and is undermining its objectives. Did you raise this issue, Taoiseach, in any of your discussions with the President and indeed with Vice President Pence or indeed any members of Congress? As appears to be custom now, Taoiseach, the White House announced a presidential visit to Ireland before our own government did. While you have an uncanny ability, Taoiseach, to announce Prime Minister May's activities, it appears that President Trump fulfills this role for you. Can you explain what actually has been agreed? Did you issue an invite to President Trump to visit? When is this visit due to take place? And when do you propose to make the basic detail available, as is customary? At a moment when 2 of the 3 strands of the Good Friday Agreement are suspended and the third is dysfunctional, does the Taoiseach think that the cause of peace and reconciliation is served by senior Irish politicians reverting to old practices and marching behind simplistic banners such as, quote, England, get out of Ireland, or indeed attacking anyone who questions this? We know that a new Ireland, as envisaged by the Good Friday Agreement, is underpinned and accepted by 3 sets of relationship: the British-Irish relationship, the North-South relationship, and the relationship between the two traditions on this island. And in any future evolution of that agreement, those three sets of relationship have to be centre stage. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, would you agree with that proposition?
Deputy Joan Burton.
Thank you. I want to ask you about two things. Since Donald Trump became President of America, he has reverted to a policy of the US Development Agency for supporting developing countries has reverted to a Republican position of boycotting all programmes which involve support for women's health issues, in particular women's health relating to access to contraception and medical services specifically for women. Successive Irish administrations have raised this with the US administration. I would like to know if you have. And secondly, I would like to know if you raised the issue of the ongoing situation between Israel and Palestine, and in particular if you raised the enormous suffering that is happening in Palestine and in various areas, Palestinian areas of Israel. His predecessors have acted down the decades as peace brokers to try and reach a peaceful settlement. I would like to know if you specifically raised that issue with President Trump, and if so, what advice you gave President Trump, or what information you gave President Trump about the position of the Republic of Ireland in relation to peace between Israel and Palestine.
Deputy Howlin.
To remain on the same issue, as you know, Taoiseach, the people of Israel went to the polls last week, and the incumbent President Netanyahu was again elected as Prime Minister of Israel. I know that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are very close friends and allies. In fact, President Trump called Prime Minister Netanyahu a great ally and a friend, and he said that there was a much better chance of peace if President Netanyahu was elected. Can I ask you, did you discuss the much expected, long expected peace proposals, the Middle East plan from the American administration? Your own programme for government, Taoiseach, commits to the recognising of Palestine as part of a two-state solution. And last year, the Taoiseach indicated that Ireland would recognise Palestine if the peace process continues to fail. At what point are we now in relation to that? Do you expect, having had these discussions with the American administration at various levels, there to be an initiative in relation to peace? And at what stage and what are the criteria that you would determine that the peace process isn't making progress and we should recognise the state of Palestine? And my final question, in relation to the undocumented. I raised with you, Taoiseach, previously the point that it would greatly strengthen Ireland's moral stand in relation to the undocumented in the United States if we regularised the undocumented here. Is there any prospect of that happening?
Taoiseach, I think it's very welcome that a congressional delegation led by Speaker Pelosi will visit Ireland, I understand, on a two-day tour. I note Speaker Pelosi's remarks setting out very clearly that there will not be a trade arrangement with Britain in the event that the Good Friday Agreement is in any way damaged or undermined. I think that's most welcome. I note that members of the Ways and Means Committee will form part of the congressional delegation, and that Congressman Richie Neal will also be in Ireland. I think all of those are very positive things. I want to acknowledge the role of the United States in so many facets of Irish life, for keeping faith with Ireland, for being an absolute innovator in respect of the peace process, for internationalising the issue of Ireland, Irish Americans right across the board have been most effective, and indeed some on the delegation that will visit this country were instrumental in those events. Can I ask whether the issue of Palestine, the relocation of the US Embassy to Jerusalem and the other interventions by President Trump, whether you raised these matters with him? I think it is profoundly worrying what is happening in Palestine, and I think it is incumbent on us to raise those issues. And Taoiseach, I'd like to know if it formed the basis of any of your conversations. I want to mention the 50,000 undocumented Irish citizens in the US. You know that they live in a state of continual fear and worry. I know that this is a complex issue. I know it's not just about the Irish, but as head of government and for all of us, we do need to find an arrangement for some 50,000 undocumented citizens of ours. So if you could expand on that also, Taoiseach.
Barrett, if you could be brief, please.
The list of dangerous threats that Donald Trump poses to the world is simply too long to go through. But if I could ask you about two of them. Trump's sabotage of the Paris Climate Change Agreement is an open declaration that he does not care about the threat, the existential threat to humanity, to life on the planet, facing our children and our grandchildren. And I just wonder, you know, particularly in the aftermath of the school students' climate change strike, and their call for radical, urgent action to save their future, whether you raise the issue, but more importantly, do you really think in that context it is appropriate to invite a climate saboteur like Donald Trump to this country? And will he not inevitably be met with fury from those young people and many more concerned about the climate? But I also want to mention also the issue of Palestine. Donald Trump has endorsed and legitimised the effective illegal annexation of East Jerusalem by moving the US Embassy to Jerusalem, a breach of international law, the annexation of the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, the ongoing administrative detention of children, which I talked about here last week, hundreds and hundreds of children subject to military law. So, you know, again, Taoiseach, do you really think somebody who's posing that kind of threat to peace in the Middle East and indeed, you know, in the world, should be welcomed to this country by you?
Thanks, Count Corlin. In relation to climate change, as deputies will be aware, the US federal government has decided to withdraw from the Paris Accords, but haven't actually withdrawn yet. There's a number of years that they have to wait before they can withdraw, and may not actually withdraw until after the next US presidential elections. I think the withdrawal applies, if you have notice, and withdrawal only applies in 21 or 22. But they have withdrawn in spirit, as Deputy Martin rightly says, and notwithstanding that, many states and many cities in the United States are continuing to take climate action and have taken the view that not only is this the right thing to do in terms of preventing climate chaos, they also think it makes sense in terms of long-term economic policies, future jobs being in the green sector, not in importing fossil fuels. It is very possible that the United States will meet its 2020 targets, while it's very unlikely that we will. And I think when we're critical of the United States and the US administration's attitude to climate change, we should bear that in mind. The best thing that we can do is to catch up and to meet our targets in 2030 at the very least. And then we'll be in a stronger position to give example and speak to other countries. In terms of a visit, there is a standing invitation to the President and Vice President of the United States to visit Ireland. As of today, there is no date agreed and no programme discussed. But as Deputy Martin correctly pointed out, President Trump can be somewhat unconventional in his communication methods and may well inform us by electronic means of his imminent arrival, but that hasn't happened so far. We didn't have an opportunity to discuss Palestine or Israel. We didn't have a discussion to discuss Israel or Palestine on this occasion, but we did last time, specifically in relation to the status of Jerusalem. The Taoiseach, however, is very engaged on this issue, and you'll know a few months ago he organised a retreat in Farmley, which was attended by Arab foreign ministers and EU foreign ministers. I think he's been engaged with Jared Kushner as well on the long awaited US peace initiative on the Middle East peace process. And we very much welcome exploratory US efforts to relaunch a process to reach a comprehensive peace agreement. We'll be interested to see the proposals when they emerge. We've no sight of them. We've already said to the US that any proposals must meet the needs of both peoples and not be one-sided. We've also urged President Abbas and the PLO to keep an open mind on these proposals. Of course, recent US actions such as cuts to UNRWA funding, the decision to move their embassy to Jerusalem, and their recent statement recognising the annexation of the Golan Heights are all damaging to the prospects for peace in our view, and are not actions that are conducive to laying the ground for a successful peace.
Can we proceed now to question 7, please?